I think the appetite for change here in San Francisco is really, really big, and I think people want change. They just don't know where to go. And you know, like I said, I've been doing door knocking. I've been doing events. I don't present myself as a Democrat or Republican. I just present myself as Steve Martin-Pinto, and these are my policies. And they're like, great. I'm, you know, you got my vote. If you're different from the status quo.
Hello, I'm Anna Demidchik. This is Laws of Achievement. And speaking with me today is Stephen Martin-Pinto. Stephen is a former Marine. He served in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Later, he retired, and now he is running for a District 7 supervisor position in San Francisco. Stephen, hi.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Did I state your information correctly so far?
Yeah. One thing, I'm not officially retired yet from the Marine Corps. I'm in the inactive reserve, so I won't retire until probably maybe a year or two from now, when I have to make a decision whether to get back in or retire.
I see. So if something bad happens, you might still get called up, right?
Correct.
Got it. Well, thank you for your service.
Sure.
Okay, so I really wanted to ask you about your time when you were active in the Marine Corps, because anybody can run for supervisor, but I think very few people can actually make it into the Marines and through the Marines. Am I right so far?
Um, you know, I would say I think the Marines attract a certain kind of individual, maybe somebody that wants to change something about themselves, somebody that wants to prove something to themselves. I think there's also a lot of, there's that also desire to serve your country, to kind of be something bigger than you are, to be a part of something bigger than you are. And for a lot of people, it's just they plain old fashioned. They want to seek adventure, and they feel like the military and the Marine Corps can offer that. I think that was kind of all the reasons why I joined.
What did you want to change in yourself, and what did you want to prove?
I think a lot of it had to do with, I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually do it, because I heard it was the toughest basic training out of all the branches of the military. And so I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And the other thing too was, at the time I joined the Marine Corps, it was about 2003, and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq was going on, and I just felt like I wanted to be a part of that history. I wanted to be there. People my age were over there fighting and serving, and I just wanted to be a part of it. I didn't feel like I was doing my part just being back home.
How old were you?
I was 25, so I was a little bit older.
And how was the boot camp? What was it like?
So I started out as enlisted, and I think for the as soon as you go into, I went to MCRD San Diego, and we drove in a bus through the gates, and then you kind of park, and then the drill instructors come on board, and then they start shouting at you. And my first thought was kind of like when you're on a roller coaster and you can't get off, but you're going to go through some pretty intense loops and turns. You just have to kind of go through it. You just have to kind of grin and bear it. Except for this roller coaster ride lasted 87 days, and I know that because I actually had a calendar, and I marked off in my little recruit handbook. I made a calendar, and it was 87 days, and I marked every day off. Every day off that I went through, I marked it off. It was pretty intense, especially at first, but then I think after a while you kind of get into a routine and you kind of get used to it.
Does it get easier at any point?
Uh, it gets easier in the fact that you can kind of learn how to manage the stress of being yelled at all the time. But it does get a little bit more difficult physically in the fact that the expectations keep on rising, and there's new challenges that you have to face at every phase of your basic training. So, for example, obstacle course, rifle range, and I had never shot a gun before. I went to the Marine Corps, and I didn't know anything about guns at all. So that was new to me, and So that was a challenge for me. Gas chamber where you get put in a room full of CS gas, uh, long hikes, lots of hours, lots of days without a lot of sleep. And, I think it gets more challenging, but then you get stronger along the way. You get tougher along the way and you manage. I think you manage. And by the last day of boot camp, you're graduated and you realize you accomplished something that I think a lot of people couldn't really do, wouldn't want to do, and couldn't do.
What was the point of the gas chamber exercise?
The point of the gas chamber exercise is so it's chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological, nuclear training, and you get put into a room full of what's called CS gas. I don't know what that actual acronym stands for.
What does it do to you?
It makes you kind of tear up and like snot's running out your nose. It's very uncomfortable to breathe, and it burns your face too. So you're shaving every day, and of course when you shave you have like little micro abrasions on your face. And I remember going into the gas chamber, and even that was burning. But you have a gas mask, and you put it on, you take it off, you put it back on, and it just kind of teaches you to trust your gear is what it does. It's you feel like you can't breathe when you're in there. Some people really panic. I remember my squad leader really panicking, and he tried to run out, and the drill instructors tackled him and threw him back in there. It was kind of funny actually because it wasn't me. I actually didn't panic, and I actually kept my cool. But some people can't do that, and eventually he learned to control himself and finish the training, and then that was it. But it's just basically an exercise in trusting your gear is what it is.
Mm-hmm. That does sound very scary,
Yeah.
I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought it was actually not that, for me, it wasn't that bad. And then you actually do gas chamber training you're supposed to do it every year
Really?
when you're in the Marine Corps, but you actually end up doing it every 2 to 3 years just because we're always behind. And it's never as bad as it was when I was in boot camp. When you become like a lance corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, it's more of a gentleman's kind of training. So it's not that bad.
Okay. Were there any other really challenging parts to the boot camp?
I think the most challenging part for me was, well, one of the most challenging parts was the obstacle course. I'm not really naturally athletic and acrobatic, so I really struggled through that. I eventually got it. I'm more of a person, I could run when I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, and even into my 40s. I could run for days, and I could do pull-ups for days. So I was more of like an endurance kind of athlete. I wasn't like a acrobatic, super coordinated. The sports I always did good at was running, rowing. Didn't do so good in baseball and football. Anything that required coordination, I wasn't that good at it. So that was probably the most challenging part for me. But even I got it after a while. So it wasn't that bad. It didn't end up being that bad.
Was it something you had to do every day, or was it like a one-time thing?
It was like once every. I think it was like once every one in a while. Like maybe I think we did it like at least a couple times during boot camp and basic training.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to the officer candidate school, we did it just about every day. So,
Oh,
and yeah, and by that point, I was pretty good at it. I wasn't like the fastest one by any means, but I could get through it.
mm-hmm. I heard about the part of boot camp. I think it's called the Crucible, if I'm correct. That's where
Yeah,
you are taken out somewhere and not given enough food, and you're gonna have to make it through several days while also marching. Is there a thing?
yeah. So when I went through it, it was a 54-hour evolution, and we did it at Camp Pendleton, and you could do it at Camp Pendleton, or you can do it on the East Coast in Paris Island. Me being West Coast, we did it at Camp Pendleton. The thing I remember about the Crucible the most was, yeah, we didn't get a lot of sleep, which was, you know, it really wasn't that bad. You just kind of like soldiered through it, I guess.
Hmm.
We did a lot of hiking, and for me, I've always been a hiker. Like I said, I've always been an endurance kind of athlete. So hiking up and down hills wasn't really a big issue for me, and I was already kind of used to hiking with heavy packs from my days as a wildland firefighter.
Hmm.
A lot of kids weren't used to that, so they had a lot of trouble with it. But I got through it. It wasn't that bad. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of sleep, but you just kind of like tough it out. And then there's also a bunch of like different obstacles, training evolutions, things you got to figure out. And you work together as a team. You get it done. You figure it out, and you don't. I guess according to the Marine Corps standards or boot camp standards, you don't pass every one, but that's not really the point. The point
Hmm.
is just to not give up and get through it.
Oh,
So,
I see. Did you
yeah.
have to ever kill animals and drink their blood?
No, but it's funny that you mentioned that because I've never been to this course, but there is a course called the Mountain Survival Course in
Mm.
Bridgeport, near Bridgeport, California, where they do teach you. I can't really 100% vouch for this, but they do teach you how to trap and hunt and kill your own food. So
Mm.
I think they do something like that. Yeah.
'Cause I did hear it somewhere or read it somewhere, and I was wondering if it was part of the Marines training.
No, not
No,
for basic training. No.
not for basic training.
Yeah.
And so they teach you those more extreme techniques probably in the courses and in the fields where you're expected to go out there into the enemy territory on the more dangerous missions. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, everybody in the fleet after they complete their basic all their basic training, their MOS school, they usually go on to they go to the fleet, and if they're lucky or unlucky or however you look at it, they do go on to other schools. So for me, before we went to Iraq in '07, '08, I was chosen to go to the basic machine gunners course, which I thought was totally awesome. I was so happy to do it. I also went to the basic Humvee operator course. So I learned how to drive a Humvee. And these are all schools that like some of them I requested to go to and I got to go, and others I was chosen to go to. But I think one of the basic things that the Marine Corps, I think this has actually changed a lot over the last generation or two, is education is continuous. So military education in the Marine Corps is a very big deal, and they want you to continue to learn. You're always going to some kind of school. You're always trying to better yourself, and I think that's a very good lesson to bring that I brought with me into the civilian world.
Mhm.
You know, what's my next course I'm going to take? What am I doing to improve myself? That's a basic belief in the Marine Corps military, and I think it's helped me out in my civilian job as a firefighter as well.
That's wonderful. So, in boot camp, was there any time where you wanted to stop it, drop out, get out and go home, and you felt, okay, no, it's not my thing?
Actually, no, I didn't. I didn't. I was like, that was never an option. I mean, yeah, I was highly uncomfortable the whole time. It's you're out of your comfort zone the whole time, but that was never a thing for me. I never wanted to go home. I never
Mhm.
wanted to quit. I just wanted to get. There's only one way out of this, and that was graduation, and that was the
Okay.
only option I gave myself.
Going slightly back, so when you were still making a decision to join the Marines, what else went into this decision? How was your family? Were they supportive of it? Did you have other military members in your family?
Yeah, my maternal grandfather, he was in the Army Air Corps. The- That's what it was called back. It was the Air Force, but before they became their own thing. He was in the Army Air Corps in World War II, from like 41 to 45.
Hmm.
And he didn't really see much of any action. He went to France. He was a tugboat operator, which, looking at it today, it didn't really kind of make any sense, his job. I mean, he was in the Army Air Corps on a
Hmm.
boat.
Like both, yeah.
So that's just the way it was back then.
Hmm.
Apart from him, I have I have a cousin who was in the Army for about 4 years, and I have another cousin who was in the Coast Guard for about 4 years. He actually just got out, and that's really about it. Both my cousins joined the military after I did, so I was the second one in my family after my grandpa to do it. My family was kind of shocked that I
Mm.
did this because I don't think they really, knowing how I am and knowing my personality and what I'm interested in, and it just didn't seem like it was like a choice I would make. But I think like a lot of kids are their moms are not so enthusiastic about it, but their dads are much more enthusiastic about it because
Hmm.
it's kind of like, I don't know. I think a lot of men look at the military service as a male rite of passage
Right.
for and for me, I think it was kind of that as well. You know,
Hmm.
I know I've heard a lot of. I don't know much about it, but I do know that for a lot of cultures, a lot of ethnicities, nationalities, whatever, they have some kind of male rite of passage, and that kind of got lost in our culture today. And I think a lot of young men want that still. They want to prove themselves still, and the military is probably the closest thing they can have to that today.
Right. Military or firefighting, something like that. Right. I
Yeah.
do see it quite a bit in my professional life because I'm a criminal defense lawyer. And the frequency with which guys get into trouble, young guys get into trouble, probably because they don't have this outlet in their life, right, where
Yeah.
they can go and take risks and prove themselves in a positive environment rather than negative because it's gone, essentially.
Right.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of talk about this term toxic masculinity. I don't know what to make of it. I do think that masculinity is a thing. It's not something that we should be afraid of. It can be a force for creation and it can be a force for destruction. It just all depends on how you want to use it.
And for protection. Yeah, just basic
Protection,
protection of the
yeah,
society because, I don't know. I think a lot of people are coming into the world with this idea that the world is a nice and fuzzy place and it's safe just because so many people grew up in these very cushy, safe environments. But if you lived in other places and you've been to other places, and I don't mean Western Europe, you know that it's not like cute and nice and safe place. You really do need people to protect you.
right, right. And I guess that was part of my reason for joining the military as well, is because I want to know more about the world
Hmm.
and not just live in this bubble called the United States. So that's why I partially did that. And as I got older and more senior in my career, that reason became more and more important to me. And I realized I made the right decision when I was younger. And I think learning more about the world was a little bit of the reason why I got in the Marine Corps, but it became the main reason why I stayed.
Hmm. Did you know that? Oh, I guess you just answered it, right? I was going to ask you if you knew it would be a 20-year long career as opposed to maybe 4 years or 8 years when you got in.
I didn't. I think I always kind of told myself, I'll get out when I feel like I've done enough. I actually was on a 6 year contract because I was a reservist, but I spent a lot of time on active duty. I think I spent about 3 or 4 years of my 6 years on active duty.
Mm, that is a lot.
And I, I told myself, I'll get out when I feel like I've done enough, but I never felt like I did enough. And there was always something more to do. And so after 6 years and then I enlisted and promoted to sergeant. I was like, okay, there's something else I want to do. I want to go to officer candidate school. I've got my degree. I can do it. So that's what I did, and they kept me in for another 4 years. And then then I was like, well, I could still do some more. There's more things I I can do because there's all these schools you can go to for after I got back off of deployment, my last deployment to Georgia, the country, which was a great deployment, by the way.
The food must have been amazing, right?
Oh yeah,
The food.
Khachapuri and Kinkali and all that. It was in the wine too. Is It's different, but it's good. Um, you know, it was like, okay, well, I went back to reserve duty and joined a unit where we actually would go overseas a lot for different exercises, and that's like, well, I still want to do this. I still, you know, um, there's still more to do, and I kept on feeling that way until about recently when my life is getting more complicated now. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. I'm settling down. I'm finally getting married. I'm getting more into my career. And now I'm doing this whole political thing as well. I just don't have time to do the Marine Corps anymore. But I feel pretty good about what I did in my 21 years. So I feel okay leaving now. I'm still going to miss it. I'm still going to have that feeling a little bit of like, maybe there's something else I could have done, but I didn't do it. But at the same time, you got to move on. And I'm also getting older too. I'm not like I was physically, like I was like 15 years ago. I mean, I was running 18-minute 5Ks 15 years ago. I can't do that anymore. So
You don't want to beat David Goggins, like almost 50 still running.
well, running is hard to joints. I mean, so I'm looking for other things to do that are lower impact, getting back into rowing, and for example. But yeah, you can't do this. You can't be in the Marine Corps forever. You got to get out at some point. Everyone's going to take off their uniform at some point. And I think for me, this last year, I went out on a high note. I went to the Philippines on a final training overseas, and I felt fine. I felt good about it. So it's time to move on to the next phase.
Great. Talk a little bit about your deployments. So your biography mentions that you've been to Iraq, to Afghanistan, any other dangerous locations?
Um, no, Iraq and Afghanistan were the most, I guess, dangerous ones. I have been to Georgia. That was as a military advisor trainer. That wasn't dangerous. I've been to Egypt and Jordan and Philippines. Those weren't dangerous. Although Egypt is a little bit wild, and it's not
Right.
really a country that's totally loves Americans. Jordan more so, but even there's parts of Jordan where they don't like Americans either. So it's a little bit uncontained, but yeah, I would say Iraq and Afghanistan were the most dangerous places I've been to. Afghanistan, I think, was the most dangerous place I've been to because at the time, and I wasn't there for this, but it happened right after I left in Camp Leatherneck in 2012. There was a major attack on the base where they actually attacked the airfield. They blew up several aircraft. There
Oh,
were some Marines who were killed. It was a big deal, and actually some generals got fired over it because they had not been negligent. This happened like the week or two after I left. So the presence of danger was always around me when I was in Afghanistan, but it tried to come in, but nothing actually worked until after I left. So yeah, but as far as like actual combat goes, I had, this is going to sound strange to a lot of people, but I never actually fired my weapon in combat. I never did. And part of me kind of regrets that. I don't know why.
you've been doing all this training, right? To do
Yeah.
just that.
I tell it to people and they don't understand why. They're like, oh, well, you're lucky. I'm like, well, yeah, but you don't understand. And it's because I wanted to feel like I did something. I don't know. It's hard to explain to non-military friends. I think the military friends, they get it.
Hmm.
And
Well, you did something. You provided support, right? And you did your part,
yeah, I mean, I hope I did. I did the best job I could. I'll tell you that much.
right? I mean, others felt safer because you were there with them, fully trained,
Yeah.
right?
So
Did you ever have any incidents with, I don't know, mortars coming into the base? I was just talking to someone from the Air Force recently, and he described that he's been in several incidents where there were like mortars shot at the base and everybody had to hunker down in the bunkers. Like, have you been in this kind of situations?
no, nothing like that. The only thing that we did was we went on a convoy. This is when I was in Iraq, and I was in Al Assad Air Base. We went on a convoy to go do a body recovery for another convoy where a Humvee flipped over and several Marines were killed. And that was like the most, I guess, intense thing that I ever did. And
Hmm.
yeah, so, but no, I've never, when I was in Al Assad Air Base in '07, '08, there was like, I think there was a ceasefire going on, or there was some kind of agreement where nobody had attacked in the amount of time that I was there. And then likewise in Afghanistan, there was a lot of things that were happening, but nothing ever got through until I left. And then the attack that killed those Marines and damaged a lot of aircraft, that
Hmm.
happened. But that happened after I left.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Still, I'm sure it's very tense when you are out there on deployment. You still have to be on your guard all the time, right? And ready.
Yeah. I think that combat is a lot of boredom punctuated by brief moments of intensity. And then you go back to boredom again. That's kind of the way I felt about it.
So, how do you handle the stress of having to be ready and making it through?
Um, I think you just kind of like, well, I wrote a lot of letters for one thing.
Hmm.
I worked out a lot. I listened to a lot of music, and I spent time cleaning my rifle or my pistol. I had a pistol too when I was an officer. And yeah, you just kind of like lean on your relationships back home. Um, in '07, '08, we didn't really have a whole lot of internet
Right.
where we were. I was part of the time in Al Assad Air Base, which was better, but not great. And then I went to Rawa, Combat Outpost Rawa, which is further out in Iraq. And the internet out there it didn't really exist at all. So we just had to write letters. And you just kind of like lean on that. And then I was with a small fire team in Rawa. We kind of just learned to look out for each other and hang out with each other. And, that's kind of what we did. So you kind of lean on your relationships. That's how you get through it.
And speaking of your family back home, how did they take your deployments? Because some people are saying that it's actually harder on the civilians because while you're on deployment, you're like in the moment, you're doing your work, you know what's going on, but they back there are really worried about you every moment.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true. I mean, there was there was times where communications were blacked out. You go into this thing called River City, where communications are purposely blacked out because something happened that they want to control the information flow out of
Hmm.
you know a base or out of Iraq or Afghanistan, and you're just doing fine. You're working out. You're doing your job. You're cleaning your rifle. You're going to chow, and for you it's all fine, But then suddenly, it's been 2 weeks and you haven't really contacted your family because time kind of just flies when you're over there, and they're thinking the worst. They're watching CNN. They're watching Fox News where some attack happened and military service members died, and of course they think that's you because they just don't know what it's like over there. They don't know how big it is over there. They don't know how many people are over there. So, yeah, that was one thing that there was a period of time where communications were blacked out for about 3 weeks. We couldn't really talk back home. And of course, my my mom is freaking out. My grandma's freaking out, and I'm like, well. And then, in the meantime, I'm like, whatever, I'm doing fine. Like you kind of forget that everyone doesn't know what you're doing. Yeah, because they're just so far away from they're so far away, they're out of sight, out of mind. You just don't think about it. But yeah, there was plenty of times where like there was some attack, and then people thought that I was the one that got attacked. So yeah, it's rough on them for sure.
Did you have any hard time integrating back into the civilian life after the deployment?
Only for like really, I don't know if I call this like difficulty, but there's when I came back from Iraq in '08. Iraq is it's a desert. It's such a desert that sometimes it's even hard to tell where the sky ends and the land begins because it's so everything's
Hands
so
on.
tan, you know. And I remember coming back into March Air Reserve Base in New Riverside County, Inland Empire. That's not like you wouldn't call it like a lush green space. But I came back and it was in springtime. I came back and, it just rained and everything was green and blooming. And I remember being really kind of disturbed by that. It was too much for me to handle.
Visually?
It was weird. Yeah, it was weird. It didn't last for very long, and then like for the next several nights afterwards, I'd wake up in the middle of the night. I like wonder where my rifle was, because you always have to keep it next to you. And it took me a while to realize I was back home. And this happened pretty much both times I came back from Iraq and Afghanistan, although it was less in Afghanistan because I was kind of used to it by that point. After that, it was after about a week or two, I was okay. But it was just, it was weird because I felt like the whole trip to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and even Georgia, like it was all a big dream because you leave the United States and then you come back, and then everything that happened between when you left and came back was a whole nother series of events. It was like a dream, but a dream that lasted for over half a year.
Right. Wow. Okay. Let's move on to your life here in California.
Sure.
Right. So your family has been here for generations, right? How did they come to California and to San Francisco?
Well, the mom side of my family has been here since the 1840s.
Was that the gold rush?
Yeah, probably. They they were here when California was part of Mexico, and I think they came, yeah, due to the gold rush, and they settled in San Francisco, and they've pretty much been here ever since. On my dad's side, his family came from Ecuador. My family on my dad's side came from Ecuador. They came here in 1952. My dad was born here in '54. So, and they came because my grandpa was a doctor in Ecuador, and he wanted to get his residency here in the United States with the intention of going back to Ecuador at some point in the future. But he never did that. He actually ended up staying the rest of his life here. And he actually died in 2008 when I was right after I came back from Iraq. So, going back to my Iraq time, I we knew he was dying because he had cancer and it was terminal. And I found out that news in Iraq, and that was one thing that made my trip a lot tougher towards the end, is because he was dying back in San Francisco and I couldn't really be there. But fortunately, I was able to make it back before he died. So, but yeah, my family has long-term ancestry here in California on my mom's side, then shorter-term ancestry on my dad's side.
Hmm. So you know San Francisco, it ins and outs, all of it, right? Probably.
I'd like to think I do. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I never get lost. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of people even people who have been here a long time, there are certain neighborhoods they've never been to. I've been to every neighborhood. I pretty much know where every street is in San Francisco. At least I generally know where it is. So I feel like I've got a map of San Francisco in my brain that's been kind of there ever since I was a little kid. Because as a little kid, I'd ride Muni to get around. You know, I think every kid growing up in San Francisco had a BMW. They had BART, they had Muni, or they walked. So that's a lot of people say that, and for me that was true. And I also like biked around a lot, skateboarded around a lot, so I got to know all parts of the city. I grew up in the '80s, '90s when you could just go off all day long, and your parents wouldn't really care where you were as long as you were home by dinner. So I was grateful to grow up in a time like that because I don't think that's true anymore. So yeah, I became very independent, and I mean, now in my adult life, I've become acutely aware of politics because as an adult, politics and the decisions made in City Hall affect you a lot more than they do when you're a kid. I mean, they affect you when you're a kid too, but I think you have more of a chance to kind of affect change as an adult if there's something going that's not what you like.
Right. So, how would you say San Francisco changed from the time when you were a kid and to now?
I would say it's changed in a few ways. When I was a kid, it was more of a working class town, and there was also a lot of like artists that lived here. I don't think that's really true anymore. There are
Hmm.
still pockets of people who are working class, like in the Excelsior, Crocker, Amazon. Even my neighborhood has some of that as well, Sunset. But it's become more of all the blue collar people have kind of left, and now you're seeing more tech people, people who are working in artificial intelligence and you know things of that nature. So it's a different kind of crowd. I also think that, and this is not a good change, but there's a lot more homelessness. There's a lot more drugs, much more than there used to be, and it's not as clean and it's not as safe as it used to be. And I know people will argue that with me, like, oh, well, you weren't around in the '80s and you don't know how certain neighborhoods were. I'm like, yeah, I was around the '80s and I do know how they were. And what we're seeing now is something that's quite a bit different than when I was growing up. Yeah, some neighborhoods have gotten a little bit better, but I think the city overall, I think the crime has gotten a lot worse, and I think the politics have gotten just way, way out of control. I think it's like there's like this contest, like who can be the most progressive, who can be the most liberal, and there's a point where it's like it's too much, and I think we've crossed that point quite a while ago.
Why were people so receptive to the liberal points of view? Like, why was it happening for so long, in your opinion?
I think because for a long time it didn't affect you.
Hmm.
If you lived in like certain neighborhoods, like Midtown Terrace or like Mount Davidson or Noe Valley, you could vote a certain way, and the crime didn't really affect you. You
Hmm.
didn't really see it. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think no matter where you go, you're seeing the crime reach you, whether you're in Midtown Terrace or Mount Davidson Manor or Miraloma Park or Noe Valley. It's happening to you now, and I think the results of how we voted for the last several, you know, almost decade, 2 decades, the results are finally catching up to us.
It confirms my theory. I have long thought that things have gotten so bad because California had so much money for such a long time that they could really get away with some very bad decisions and not even see the consequences thrown in their face. Like, it doesn't happen if you have fewer resources, if you live in like a poor country or a poor state. Over there, you have to think things through very carefully, because the moment you make that bad decision, it's going to come back to bite you, like right there.
I think that's a very accurate description of what happened in what's been happening in California and what's been happening in San Francisco. For a while, San Francisco was like the place to be a tourist, the place to travel to, it was a destination. And we had a lot of money in our bank because, we could afford it. We could afford a few break-ins here and there. We could afford a few shootings once in a while because it was San Francisco, and it takes a lot to kind of ruin the reputation. But now, unfortunately, we've ran out of our reputation has been exhausted, and it's taken a beating nationally, and it's actually quite the opposite of when I was growing up. Like San Francisco has become, it was a destination. It was like the place to be, but unfortunately, due to several factors, bad governance, lack of oversight, it's now become, in many ways, widely mocked in the media. Some of it is we deserve, some of it is overblown, but I do think that I do think that a lot of it is, whether you think it's deserved or not. The fact is, it's true, and we need to work to fix that.
I find it crazy that so many people would say that would basically deny that it's true and say something like, "Oh, you watch too much Fox News," right? And you would have to explain that, no, I don't have to watch Fox News. I went to San Francisco like a few days ago, and this is what I saw with my own eyes.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, I worked downtown as a firefighter, and I worked at a station which is one of the busier stations in San Francisco, and we'd be going downtown through Civic Center, all night, every night, and it was a open market drug festival happening every night where people were overdosing, selling drugs, and this is not normal. People say, "Oh, well, that's just big city life." It's not. It's not. This is not happening in many other cities across the nation. And the other thing too is this was one thing that happened to me, and I'll never forget it. Is a couple of friends and I were having a late lunch at some restaurant near the Embarcadero downtown, and we were outdoors. And I heard a loud crash, screeching of tires, a bunch of screaming. And what happened was it was a smash and grab break-in that happened pretty much right in front of us. So I ran over to find out what was going on. And it was a family of tourists from Colombia, from Bogota, Colombia. And I spoke to them in Spanish and found out, asked if they were okay, and what they needed from me, and if they wanted to call the police or anything. And they said, "Yeah, well, we're tourists from Colombia. We've been here for a week. This is the second time that we've been broken into."
Ooh.
Yeah. They said also, "Our plane is about to leave in 3 hours, and our passports, our luggage, our identification is gone." And they said to me, "Stuff like this doesn't happen in Bogota, Colombia. Stuff like this doesn't happen in Bogota, Colombia."
Colombia, yeah.
Just think about that for a minute there.
Right.
What they're saying is there's less law and order here than there was in Colombia, which
is known
used to be, and maybe still is, a very violent place, especially when the drugs were really rampant. It was embarrassing for me. I didn't know what to do or what to tell them. I said, "Look, this is not typical, but I mean, what are they going to go back and tell their family and friends in San Francisco or in Bogota about San Francisco? They're going to tell them, 'Don't come to San Francisco. It's not safe.'" And unfortunately, this is not a unique situation. A lot of tourists have had this experience, and it's because of this that our reputation has taken quite a beating, and we need to fix that.
And it used to not be the case. Right, it used to be much safer. I saw something similar in New York City because I lived in New York City until 2021 when I moved to the Bay Area. And I remember New York City was actually pretty good until about 2019 or so. It was a pre-pandemic, but before 2019, it felt safe. It was all right. And then 2019, that's when it suddenly started to feel less safe. The subway was just full of homeless suddenly. And like the people around the courthouses, a lot of them also homeless, started to be like a little threatening, I would say, in their demeanor once in a while. And that was, again, pre-pandemic, so you cannot really blame COVID for it. So, yeah, it looks like several cities did decide to take this path back to worse after having had it together, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so you are now running for the supervisor of 7th District. Where is that 7th District for those who don't know San Francisco geography?
That's pretty much the southwest corner of San Francisco.
Hmm.
So it's the geographically largest district in San Francisco, but it includes basically everything from the neighborhoods. It includes Midtown Terrace, Forest Mills, Forest Hill, St. Francis Woods, Ingleside Terrace, Balboa Terrace, Sunnyside, Westwood Highlands, Westwood Park, Golden Gate Heights, Inner Sunset. Um, I think I got it all. Maryland Park. I might have missed that one. At Stonestown, Merced Extension Triangle Neighborhood Association. Can't forget about them. I think that's all the neighborhoods. But it's a big wedge of Southwest San Francisco.
But your job as a supervisor, if you get it, it's not going to give you a lot of influence over what's going on with the crime situation, or is it?
I think it will. I think it will. Um, a lot of supervisors, the phrase of the day now is "I'm pro public safety." You know, back in 2020, it was defund the police or reimagine the police or something like that. My message has always been, and has always been, we need public safety. We need police. But it's not enough to just hire more police, which I'm totally in support of hiring more police. But, and here's where a lot of politicians kind of like get a little bit sleazy, is they'll say out loud, we support public safety because that's the politically popular thing of the day now. But behind the scenes, they'll support a police commission, police commissioners that actually will do the opposite of public safety. They'll act as a hindrance to public safety because a lot of politicians at heart are still activists. So, but they just want to get elected. So they may talk a certain way, I'm for good schools, I'm for public safety, but their actions betray their words and they actually do the opposite of what they're saying. So while they're promoting public safety, they're appointing police commissioners that will tie the hands of police. While they support the police publicly, they may say, well, okay, now here's an additional bunch of requirements you got to do every time you make an arrest. So now you've got 4 hours of paperwork instead of two. And it's just all these things add up, and it makes us less safe by appointing worthy police commissioners and rejecting bad ones by supporting legislation and policy which supports public safety versus policies that act in opposition to public safety. And I think just generally being, transparent. A lot of these bad policies, bad legislation get passed under the cover of darkness. For example, it's at the state level, but Alexander's Law, for example, which would have toughened penalties against convicted drug dealers whose drugs has been proven to kill a user. And you wouldn't even get charged the first time. The first time it would be a warning. The second time you could potentially get charged with manslaughter. So, a lot of the same legislators that talk a good public safety game, they killed this bill in private under the cover of darkness because secretly they're still about decarceration, about restorative justice, which sounds great, but what is it really? It's just a euphemism for, it's an ideological thing. It's not it's not useful. It doesn't work, at least how they envision it. So just being transparent, saying this is what's going on. And if you let people know what's going on in the legislature, what's really happening, they'll get active. They'll get they'll get informed. They'll get active, and they'll get passionate. So you can use your position as a bully pulpit as well for public safety.
That's true. So I really like seeing how it works at different levels, right? So the legislature is what everybody talks about. It's like Prop 47, for example, right? When it passed and what impact it had. But what I see talked about a little less is refusal of the DAs to bring charges sometimes, even for the incidents where people got caught and there is evidence, right? The DA would simply decide not to prosecute, which is not really part of Prop 47, because technically the DAs could still prosecute and even put people in jail on a misdemeanor if they choose to prosecute a misdemeanor. So there's that layer. And then you just talked about that layer where the police officers are disincentivized from even coming in and making an arrest because it's hours and hours of paperwork. And that's probably something that I don't really see it talked about quite a bit. But
Yeah.
that's a very important practical consideration.
In San Francisco, we actually had a DA, Chase Bodine. Maybe you've heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
He was a DA that ran on a platform of restorative justice. Let's reimagine the justice system because it's historically or systematically racist. It's unfair to people of, poor people. Let's find a new way of justice and let's call it restorative justice. Well, that sounds great in theory, but what really happened was a complete lack of accountability. It was diversion into programs that didn't exist yet, so it was effectively it was ineffective. It was a lot of ideological, highly ideological in nature, not practical. It didn't take into account human nature, and it was a big failure. And crime went up a lot of under Chase Modine's guidance. A lot of cases were dropped, not prosecuted. Just instead of like charging somebody with a crime, it's like, well, let's have you meet the victim of who you victimized and have like a conversation and talk about it and sing kumbaya and hug it out. Well, yeah, if you don't understand human nature, that might sound like it could work. But if you're a criminal, you're just thinking, well, oh, that's all I got to do. Well, that's easy. I'll just do that and continue doing my crime because there's really no accountability. So Chase Bodine was one of these ideological DAs that kind of went across, like a lot of them across the country, like Pam Price in Oakland or Alameda County. Heard Larry Krasner in Philadelphia as one of them, George Cascone in LA County. Luckily, and I don't know how this happened. It was a miracle that it happened, but he got recalled in San Francisco. And I think that kind of I think that was a learning point for us, San Franciscans, I think by nature, they want to do the right thing. They want to feel like they're, what is the next new idea politically that we can embrace? Because, the old ways are just, they don't work. They're old fashioned. That's old hat. Let's do the new, out with the old, in with the new. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work out that well. And I think that we learned those tough lessons. And that's what led to the recall of Chase Bodine. And there were several high profile attacks. The most highest profile attack of all was the Vice Retanapakti attack that happened, I think it was 2021 or 2022, probably 2021, where an innocent man, senior citizen, got knocked over by a younger man, and unprovoked, no reason why it happened, and the response was very, very visceral from the Asian community because the man was Asian, and the response from Boudin was very cold and indifferent. Like, oh, the guy that attacked that guy, Vichira Chanapakti, he just had a temper tantrum, which is a very, very, it's a stupid thing to say. And I think that was the beginning of the end for him. And, I think the Asian community had had enough because they were, a lot of the victims of crime in San Francisco were Asian. And
Mm.
they had enough. They had a revolt. I think a lot of voters had a revolt because they realized they were sold, you know, they were sold a bad bag of goods, and they overturned it. And after we had a recall, which was successful in 2022, Pam Price was up for election across the Bay, and it was just a similar situation. And I think a lot of people from the Bay, from San Francisco, tried to warn Alameda County, like, don't vote her in. You're not going to get what you think. And it didn't happen that way. And I think everybody's got to learn their own. Sometimes people got to learn the lessons for themselves. And I think Alameda County has or is because, from what I understand, the recall effort, the petition for the recall has been successful. So there will be a recall vote at some point in the future. And yeah.
So, other than public safety, what are the main things you want to push for if you get elected as a supervisor?
Well, we need accountability and transparency in government because we don't have it currently. Just this week, the big story this week is $120 million, money that was earmarked for law enforcement back in 2021 or 2022 was shifted to this thing called the Dreamkeeper Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a grant for a litany of programs and nonprofits to enrich underrepresented people in San Francisco, like the Black community. Sounds great, right? We all want people to succeed, but really, what it really was is it exploited people's willingness to or charity, them being charitable, and it diverted money to programs that did nothing and really enriched only a few people at the taking advantage of people's goodwill and desire to do good. It was a big scam, and like the head of the Dreamkeeper Initiative, I think her name is Sharon Davis. She shared an apartment or a house with her partner, and she diverted funds to her partner's charity. This is the kind of corruption that goes on all the time in San Francisco. And when it comes to stuff that we actually need, like streets, infrastructure, schools, new police cars, new fire engines, other things like that, it's like the money is like hard to find. But when it comes to like nonprofits and charities and other grants, it's like, oh, here's all the money you want. You can take whatever you need. And there's no expectation of accountability. There's no expectation of results. There's no performance-based metrics. And it's such a huge money waste. And by some accounts, we're shifting about $1.6 billion into programs like these. Again, with no expectation of results, with no way of knowing whether the money we're spending is doing any good at all. And this, to me, is the biggest problem, and one of the biggest problems besides public safety in San Francisco, because it's the reason why, a lot of our basic services have not been met. I would think that a city with a $14.6 billion budget, or next year's going to be a $15.8 billion budget, should have clean streets, well-paved streets, buses and trains that run on time, schools that are in good repair and are good schools, and all these other basic expectations. But we're not getting it. We're not getting it because that's not, politicians would rather speak to like higher level, world issues like, oh, let's solve climate justice. Let's solve, racial justice. Great. But you can't have any of those things if you've got crime, corruption, those are the things that we need to be taking care of first, the basics, and we're not doing it.
You're running as a Republican, are you?
No, I'm a no party preference.
How does that play into the current political landscape?
I think people are increasingly becoming tired of the Democratic Party in San Francisco because for the last 50, 60 years, they've led us down this path and the results have not been good. And people they want to break away. They know it's not right. And, they want a new choice. They want something different. You have your people who are still dogmatically stuck to the Democrats, like they'll vote blue no matter who. And I think that's becoming an increasingly smaller fraction of people. I think there's more people I meet who are saying to me, I'll vote for anybody at this point. I don't care if they're Republican or not. I'll vote for somebody who can fix the problems. So, I think we're seeing this in the increasing amount of people who are leaving the Democratic Party in San Francisco, people who are going Republican, especially the Asian communities going increasingly Republican, because they've felt abandoned by a lot of Democrats on issues that are very important to them, like the school board recalls, like the Prop 16 in 2020, the one that would have reintroduced race considerations into contracts and admissions. Those are all things that Democrats supported. And, the Democrats also supported, of course, Chesa Boudin. They didn't support the recalls of him. And I think a lot of Asians and even just moderates in general are saying, you know what, enough. I don't care anymore. I can't trust the Democratic Party in San Francisco anymore to make good decisions. So I'm looking elsewhere. I'm going away from the Democratic Party. They may not go Republican, but they're leaving the Democratic Party. And I think we're reaching a point where more and more people are coming to that realization. When I do door knocking, I hear so many people say, I'm like a liberal. I believe in such and such. I believe in gay marriage, equality for all. But what's happening here is too much for me. I can't take it anymore. And you're finding an increasing number of people being betrayed by the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. And, it all comes down to is how can you trust the same party that got us into this mess to get us out of it? How can you? And if you keep on voting for them, thinking that they've changed, they're just fooling you. They're not going to change. They're not going to change unless they get scared that they're actually going to lose power, losing power to the people who are like myself, no party preference, or people who are Republicans or libertarians or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I think the appetite for change here in San Francisco is really, really big. And I think people want change. They just don't know where to go. And, like I said, I've been doing door knocking. I've been doing events. I don't present myself as a Democrat or Republican. I just present myself as Steve Martin-Pinto, and these are my policies. And they're like, great. You got my vote. If you're different from the status quo, I don't even have to do a lot of sales sometimes. Just the fact that I'm not the status quo is enough of a reason for some people not to vote, to vote for you.
So a lot of things you're talking about in nonprofits accountability, in bringing back the public safety, it really has to do more with management, right? With basic management functions, management of organizations. So what do you think in your background, in your past experience, gives you an upper hand, gives you enough knowledge to set up the correct procedures to ensure that this accountability actually happens?
Well, I think a lot of it just becomes from, me being, as a firefighter EMT, like I see how our city policies play out in real life. And, I'm aware of some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work. As somebody who's been kind of following along in government and being involved in neighborhood associations and being a veteran affairs commissioner, I've had a little bit of insight into how the legislative process works. But ultimately, I think it comes from knowing, what departments and services can a city not function without. What are the essential services and departments that a city must have in order to function, and focusing on those, prioritizing those from most important to least important. I think that's a first step right there. But that's a thing that a lot of politicians, they don't want to do that. I think the mayor's proposal a while ago was to automatically cut 10% from every department, and that's like her idea of reducing the budget and cutting spending. Well, some departments are more important than other departments, so I don't think that's the right approach. I think some departments can get cut a lot more than 10%, and some should be cut less than 10%. The other thing too is just something I'm very interested in. I'm very experienced with in the military is unity of command. Having one supervisor and a span of control of about three to seven people underneath them. From what I've learned about certain departments like the SFMTA, if you ask them, anybody in the SFMTA, who's your boss? It's like, well, I got like 8 bosses, So there's no organization. There's no clear cut lines of hierarchy, and all that needs to be untangled, so that every person in every person in SF government, every person that works for SF government has one boss. There's a clear role defined for that person. And, the other thing too, I think we need to do is look at all the positions in City Hall and find out what's unnecessary, find out what's redundant, and eliminate those. So I think that's one of the first most important things you can do to begin to untangle this mess of government in City Hall.
I also noticed that you were working with FEMA in California. What was that about?
Okay, so FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association, has several urban search and rescue teams throughout the nation. The one that I'm a part of through the SFR department is called Task Force 3, California Task Force 3, based in Menlo Park. The one across the bay is based in Alameda County, Oakland, and that's Task Force 4. There's several up and down the state. There's several across the country. And we, for a long time in San Francisco, were not a part of any FEMA task force. That was a huge vulnerability for us, because if there was an earthquake or there was some kind of natural disaster, we would have had to rely on people from outside our department, outside our city, to manage a disaster here in San Francisco. That has since changed as of a few years ago. We were allowed to become a part of Task Force 3 in Menlo Park, and now we're building up our expertise so that if something was to happen in San Francisco, we would have people from San Francisco managing and leading the rescue effort here, which is a great thing.
Hey, you want locals to be handling those things, right? Somebody who actually knows the ground.
Exactly. I'm a heavy equipment rescue rigging specialist and a hazmat team manager. I have two roles with FEMA Task Force 3. Like I said, we were allowed to join the task force about 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's one of the first ones to do it, to apply and get accepted.
So do you also work with the feds in this role, not just with the city officials?
We will work with the feds. So like if there is a big earthquake, we're going to be the ones that are leading the effort, but we will have a lot of assistance from federal FEMA teams from across the state and across the country. But we will have a very, very significant presence in the command of the effort. Whereas before, if we were not a part of the FEMA task force, we would be kind of pushed aside and let some outsiders come in and run the rescue efforts of a disaster that happened in our city. That's not optimal by any means.
Well, I hope it doesn't happen. I hope it's the same situation as with you and your not actually having to shoot or do any kind of combat when you were in the Marines. I know it might be upsetting, but hopefully there are no big earthquakes. And
unfortunately, it's not a case of if, it's a matter of when. So it's going to happen someday, and we the best thing we can do is to be prepared for it. And I think we're headed in the right direction.
Okay, yeah, well, you're right. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Definitely something to keep in mind. Stephen, thank you so much. It's been very interesting to learn about San Francisco and your role in the city right now and your aspirations if you do become the supervisor for District 7. Best of luck to you. And yeah, thank you for your service again.
Thank you.